guys. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about the First Amendment. I'm actually standing on a chair looking at our freedom of speech poster from myhighschool.org. But we're also going to talk about press freedoms, freedom of speech, everything that's in the First Amendment. And you're going to complete this Ed puzzle questions on them. So here we go. So there are a lot of notes, so I'm going to cover this PowerPoint in about 2 days. So first of all, this is Unit 1. There will be a quiz on this next week, just this general background information. What is journalism? We've been talking about it, but there are actually different definitions for journalism. We talked about journalists. So according to the American Heritage Dictionary, it is, there it is. It is also all of these things. The style of writing characteristic of material newspapers and magazines. It's newspapers and magazines. It's this course. It's written material of current interest or wide popular appeal. So it is all of these things. Okay, some skills of journalists that you will be responsible for. Okay, you'll need to distinguish what is newsworthy by observing the environment. You need a broad knowledge of the world, nation, region they are covering. The ability to communicate with just about anyone, whether it's the President of the United States or a homeless man living on 3rd Street in Philly. You need the ability to speak and write correctly. Yes, you need good language skills. Common sense and good judgment, knowing when to approach somebody, when to push somebody that you're interviewing with a harder question, and when to back off. When something is tasteful and not tasteful. You need to keep ethics in mind. You need to have poise under pressure if you're covering a hurricane or a storm. It's a controversial issue with people are upset, you're covering a protest. Poise under pressure. Adherence to ethical and moral standards, we've already been talking about those. Okay. Types of journalists. You could be anything you want in this field. These are just the basics. Printed or online news media. TV news broadcaster, radio news broadcaster, photojournalist. And these are just the journalists, but in the field of journalism itself, you could be a press agent. You could just be an editor or a copy editor and just look at type and never actually set foot out to interview. You could be someone doing the layout in the background. There's so much in the field of journalism we'll be talking about later in the year as we're going through. Okay, these are other types of journalists that aren't necessarily serious. They have an opinion. So we have shock jocks. That's a radio DJ who entertains her audience by saying outrageous, vulgar, or offensive things. And you know who they are, okay? It could be your CSNBC, could be Rachel Maddow, it could be on Fox, you have Hannity. There are various people who will say outrageous things. Some are offensive, some are vulgar. Same thing with radio or TV talk show hosts. Okay, they're not reporting just facts. They're giving you opinion. And when we're talking the First Amendment, you got to remember RAPS. Religion, assembly, press, petition or protest, and speech. And I have a little video for you on that. All right, so the First Amendment freedoms, where did they come from and when? Okay, this is a really brief history because if you were in a long journalism course in college, they might go into everything, the printing press, but I don't think I have time to do that. Certainly not in this video. Okay, so they were adopted in 1791 to the Constitution of the United States. The First Amendment's roots can be traced back to British documents, colonial documents, and early post-revolutionary state documents. The First Amendment was actually developed in response to fear of abuses of power by government officials. So basically the colonists were speaking out and they got arrested for speaking out. Their printing presses were shut down. So this was our founding fathers' way of ensuring that the government could never again abuse their power. So there was a national tension between security and living and liberty. The First Amendment is a dynamic document that changes in meaning when courts interpret it. What that simply means is things like the internet. They are constantly having cases go to the Supreme Court sometimes about the internet and what's acceptable, what's not, and censorship. So that's a big one. Student speech is always something that's being challenged. So a while back, there were students wearing bracelets for boobs. They were pink bracelets. It was for breast cancer awareness. And some school officials said, well, it says boobs on it. You can't have that. But believe it or not, it was found to be constitutional. Yes, it was symbolic and political message, so it was allowed, and the students should not have been punished or suspended. So that's what I mean by it's always changing, always up for interpretation. Okay, here are our freedoms again. Again, it's freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, your rights to assemble, and your right to petition. And hopefully you watched the video in the beginning of class that I have on that one. It's kind of funny. All right, the First Amendment became part of the U.S. Constitution more than 200 years ago. Here is what it actually says. Move that up. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the freedom exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Or redress means discussion of problems they're having. So you are definitely allowed to do that. Okay, a lot of stuff that journalists will cover is whether or not something's unconstitutional or constitutional. And these are things that they'll cover in the newspaper, and then people end up going to court and fighting over what they think should be protected as free speech or not. So anything that advocates or supports illegal acts is unconstitutional. So you cannot support an illegal act. So you cannot wear a shirt that says smoke marijuana. You could wear a shirt that said legalize marijuana, of course without the leaf on it. So you don't want to act like you're advocating people to do something that's harmful, but you can advocate for something political. So anything that advocates a political position is constitutional. All right, so what's covered in this speech? So your clothing, again, back to the shirt. Can you wear that shirt in school? Is it going to be considered offensive or illegal? You can't wear a shirt with a pot plant on it, but you could wear a shirt that says, no, I wouldn't put any pictures, legalize marijuana. That is legal, and you should not be punished for it. Hairstyle. Back in the 1950s, there were court cases when people started wearing their hair long. Right now, there have been cases with African Americans and braids and in sports and wrestling, and should they have to do this or cut their hair or whatever. So hairstyle is covered under a form of actual freedom of speech and expression. The internet, freedom of speech. So that's why you can actually find on the internet how to make a pipe bomb, because it is considered freedom of speech. It's controversial, but that's what the courts have decided. Text messaging falls under freedom of speech. If you are in school and you use the school's Wi-Fi, your text messages can be checked if it's causing a disturbance or a disruption. So yes, they fall under freedom of speech and expression. And statements made in public. Anything you say, if you threaten publicly to harm somebody, that's not covered. If you threaten publicly. Now, if you just say something in a classroom among a few people, it depends what's considered public. The court has to decide that. So that's all under freedom of speech. Okay, these are all vocabulary terms you should know when talking about freedom of speech. So obscenity, something such as a word, act, or expression that is indecent or lewd, meaning sexual, in content. That's not covered. If you say something like that in public, that would not be considered constitutional. You could pay a fine for that. Symbolic speech is covered. So a symbolic speech could be wearing an armband to protest the war. We're going to talk about a court case where students did that in school and how they were punished, and then it was overturned by the Supreme Court. Wearing those ribbons, that's symbolic speech. Actually burning the American flag, if it's being done with your own flag, your property, and you are doing it to say that the government is wrong for some actions they're taking, that is symbolic speech. So you cannot be jailed for burning your own flag. Okay. Unprotected speech. 9 areas not protected by Constitution, so you should know that term. There are 9 places. We're not going to get to them today. Truth, conformity to fact or actuality. Hate speech, I think you've heard this one a lot. It's anything intended to degrade, intimidate, or incite violence or prejudicial action against someone based on their race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, or disability. The term covers written as well as oral communication. This is where schools have to protect students, and you can have like a bullying charge brought against you if you are guilty of committing hate speech in school. And in real life, you can pay a hefty fine for hate speech. And political speech. Political speech is any form of speech that is directly linked to the government. It performs a valuable function as a check and balance of the government. So speaking out against government intervention or financial contributions are considered political speech and are protected. So you can speak against the government. They would like us not to, but you can. Okay, there's a lot of information here. So I'm going to end this I'm already at 11 minutes. I'm going to end it by under 15, I promise. So slander is a false and malicious statement or report about somebody. That's when you've said it. Different than libel, which is when it's written down. So you can't go into like a meeting, a public meeting, like a board meeting for the school and say something that isn't true about a teacher, like she must have been drinking when she graded that paper. That could be considered slander. Boycott, a form of symbolic speech. So again, you're allowed to boycott and not buy something or wear shirts that say don't buy this. Commercial speech is advertising, also protected as long as it doesn't harm the public, as long as they're not lying to you. So protected speech is simply any of those that we've talked about already that is interpreted as protected by the Supreme Court or implied by the First Amendment. The court has never held that the Constitution establishes an absolute right to free speech. So just because we have freedom of speech in the First Amendment, it doesn't mean you can say it without a consequence. The court will determine whether or not your expression violated somebody else or harmed somebody else. So that's why even though we have freedom of speech in the First Amendment, that doesn't truly mean you can say whatever you want, especially not in school. And censorship is when they edit. Expurgate means to cut it up. Stifle, stop it, or repress. So cut parts of it out so people don't even feel like doing it or writing it anymore. That's what censorship is. Okay, last slide. Okay, I'm sorry, that was the last slide. I hope you understand these terms, that it's a lot of information to go over. Study the Ed Puzzle for when we have a quiz. I'll probably just put a link for just this YouTube video without the Ed Puzzle. If you want, you're welcome to take notes from this on your own if you want. And hopefully you'll understand this. You are going to have a long-term assignment that deals with the First Amendment, probably looking at how well the media covers all the aspects of the First Amendment, especially during this pandemic time and during some of the protests that we've seen. So that's going to be one of the projects. Another project is just a PowerPoint from A to Z on the First Amendment. So there's a couple coming up that you'll have to use. So good luck. Hope you understood everything. Always feel free to reach out to me with questions. Bye-bye.